Have you ever felt a sudden pull, like something was trying to stop you? Picture this. You're about to leave home, keys in hand, mind on autopilot, and something tells you to wait. Just wait. Maybe it's a strange feeling in your chest. Maybe it's a dream that won't leave you alone, or a number that keeps following you over and over again. What if the last thing you felt was not fear, but a message? Today's story is real. A true moment when the invisible whispered. When an ordinary woman noticed a quiet pattern, a number that kept appearing right before her life was about to change forever. Some would say it was coincidence, but what if it wasn't? What if it was one of those rare angel signs before tragedy, a divine nudge meant to protect her? What follows is not fiction, it's a testimony, a sacred moment where intuition, mystery, and something far greater than ourselves stepped in. Just in time. Because sometimes before everything falls apart, something speaks. Not loudly, not with thunder, but softly, in repetition, in dreams, in numbers, in signs. So before we begin, ask yourself, would you recognize a warning if it came gently, wrapped in silence? Some believe in coincidences, others believe in divine signs. If you're ready to discover real stories of angelic warnings and last-minute interventions, subscribe to Saved by a Sign and join this journey of faith and mystery. Now, let me tell you what happened to Rachel Collins. I didn't notice it at first. You never do. Not when the signs come gently, without thunder, without warning, but by the fourth day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The number 717 was everywhere, on receipts, on street signs, even stitched in bold white across the back of a stranger's hoodie at the gym. I remember that moment so clearly. He passed me by without a glance, headphones in, unaware of the way my breath caught in my throat. I stared at the numbers like they had been waiting for me to see them. At first, it felt like coincidence. Then, like a joke, but slowly it turned into something else, a presence. I began writing it down. 717 on the deli ticket, 717 on the microwave clock when I walked into the kitchen without reason. 7:17 a.m., 71% battery. I circled it in my journal again and again until the ink began to bleed. I wasn't sure what I was doing. I only knew that something wanted me to see it. The days were warm, dry. Phoenix summers always feel like standing too close to an open oven. Still, heavy, breathless. But that week, the air felt different, like the world was waiting or watching. I remember walking home one evening as the sky turned the color of bruised peaches, orange and violet fading into a darkness too quiet to trust. The wind didn't move. No birds, no cars. Just this strange hush, like the pause between a question and the answer you're afraid to hear. That night, I dreamed something I still can't explain. I was standing in the hallway of my apartment holding my keys. Everything looked real, too real. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. A shape in the mirror, a flicker of movement over my shoulder. When I looked again, no one was there, only the soft sound of a clock ticking far too loudly. Then a voice, not loud, not frightening, just firm. Wait. I woke up before the sun. My skin was cold with sweat. I could still feel the echo of that voice in my chest. I told myself it was just a dream, just stress. But I didn't leave the apartment that morning, not right away. I stood at the door, hand on the knob, frozen in place. I remember whispering, "What am I waiting for?" I didn't get an answer, but I waited anyway, and that's when the sirens came. From my window, I watched the flashing lights reflect off the walls of the building across the street. A car accident just 1 block from where I would have been. A delivery truck ran the red light. The same intersection I crossed every day at that exact time. I stood there, barefoot, numb. I didn't cry, I didn't panic, I just stared at the blue and red lights, as they painted everything in urgency and disbelief. Later that evening, I found myself Googling 7117 again. I wasn't looking for facts anymore. I wanted meaning. I needed to believe it meant something. Angel number 7117 symbolizes inner strength and transitions. Transitions? I hadn't been planning any. Life had been quiet, predictable. But maybe that's the thing. We never plan for the moments that matter most. I think back now to the voice in the dream, the number that chased me, the feeling that someone was holding me back, not to punish, but to protect. Was it just coincidence? Maybe. But in my heart, it doesn't feel like it. Because when I look at everything, the signs, the silence, the stillness before the storm, it felt like love. A love I didn't ask for, but received anyway. A warning, soft and strange, a delay, wrapped in mystery, a tragedy that never touched me. Maybe we're not always meant to understand the signs. Maybe we're just meant to notice them and listen. It was a Wednesday night, one of those quiet ones where the world feels far away. I'd left the windows open. The summer air floated in, warm and thick, like a blanket that couldn't quite comfort. Everything in the apartment was still. No music, no television, just the soft hum of the ceiling fan spinning lazily above my bed. I remember lying there, watching the shadows on the wall, thinking how peaceful it felt, and how strange that peace was. And then I heard it. A voice, soft, close, but not outside, and not quite inside my head either. Not this path, wait. That's all it said. 4 words, but they wrapped around my heart like a hand. I sat up so fast the sheets twisted around my legs. My pulse was in my ears. My eyes scanned the dark room, half expecting to see someone standing in the doorway. But there was no one. Just the soft glow of the streetlight outside, casting pale gold lines across the floor. I live alone. Always have. I whispered, "Hello," even though something deep inside already knew I wouldn't get an answer. I checked every room. The kitchen light flicked on with a click that sounded too loud. I opened closets, looked behind the shower curtain, even peered under the bed like a child afraid of monsters. But there was nothing, only silence. But it wasn't normal silence. It was alive, like the air itself had paused, like it was waiting for me to do something or not do something. I stood there in the hallway for a long time, barefoot on the cool floor, trying to calm my breath, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. It hadn't been scary, not exactly, but it felt urgent. Like someone was gently taking me by the shoulders, turning me away from something I couldn't see yet. Not this path. What path? What did it mean? I went back to bed eventually, but I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring up at the ceiling, replaying the moment in my mind, the warmth of the air, the stillness, the feeling that something had entered the room just long enough to say what it needed to say, and then left. Some people say our minds play tricks on us, that when we're tired, we imagine things. Maybe, but this didn't feel imagined. It felt given. I couldn't explain it. I still can't. But something spoke that night, and whatever it was, it didn't want me to keep going the way I was. It wanted me to stop, to wait, to choose differently. And in the quiet that followed, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Protected, as if something unseen had stepped into the silence and whispered just loud enough to change everything. The next morning came with golden light spilling across my apartment floor, as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. But inside me, everything felt different. The voice, its echo hadn't left me. I went into work like I always did, coffee in hand, answering emails, nodding through morning chatter. Then my manager called me in. He shut the door behind me gently. "Rachel, this might be sudden," he said, sitting across from me, "but there's a new branch opening in Denver. They're moving fast. Need someone next week. The position's yours if you want it. Higher pay, fresh air, a new start. He smiled like he was giving me a gift, but I couldn't smile back. I nodded, said thank you, even managed to ask for 24 hours to think. But the truth is, my heart had already spoken. Something inside me had recoiled, not out of fear, but out of knowing. I should have been thrilled. A chance to leave behind my routines, my quiet apartment, the stillness that sometimes felt too loud. I'd told myself for months that I needed a change, that I was stuck, that maybe moving away would shake something loose. But now, sitting there under the glow of the office lights, I felt the opposite. Tight, cold, as if I was being pulled towards something I wasn't supposed to touch. I walked home, slowly. The air was clear, sun still high, but the path felt dim somehow, as if a shadow had fallen, where none should be. Even the trees in the park seemed quieter. And then, just as I crossed the edge of the playground, a boy ran past me, chasing a ball, laughing. Free! He wore a blue soccer jersey, the number 7117 printed huge across his back. I stopped walking. The sound around me faded. Cars, birds, footsteps, all became distant. The number hovered there like it had been planted in my path. 3 days ago, I wouldn't have noticed. A week ago, I would have smiled and kept going. But now, it felt like a message, a reply, not this path. Wait. I stood there for a moment too long, letting the world move around me. I couldn't explain what I was feeling, not fully. It wasn't fear, it wasn't even doubt. It was a kind of spiritual tension, like a thread being pulled tight inside me. Was this opportunity really meant for me? Or was it a test to see if I'd listen? I went home in silence. No music, no phone, just the sound of my own breath and the soft creak of my apartment door closing behind me. And again I saw the clock, 7:17 p.m. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same one where I had heard that voice. The offer was real. The future it promised was tempting, but something else was speaking louder now, something invisible, persistent, and strangely full of love. And I was beginning to understand not all doors are meant to be opened. Not every path is ours to take. Some are placed before us, only to be turned away from. Because sometimes the most powerful sign isn't a miracle in the sky. It's a quiet no that reaches the soul before the mind can catch up. That evening, I couldn't stay inside. The walls of my apartment felt too quiet, too close, like they were listening to my thoughts. So I slipped on my shoes and walked down to the bus stop just outside my building. I didn't plan on going anywhere. I just needed air, movement, stillness in a different place. The sky had turned soft lavender, and the breeze had finally cooled. The world felt wrapped in a kind of hush, like the final moments before a page turns. I sat on the worn bench beneath the flickering street lamp. My thoughts were noisy, restless. Denver, the job, the voice, the number. I couldn't make them line up. None of it made sense, and yet it all meant something. I could feel it. That's when I noticed her. She had arrived without a sound. A woman, mid-60s, maybe older, wrapped in a navy coat with a floral scarf tied gently around her neck. Her posture was calm, hands folded in her lap. She sat just a few inches away, but not too close, like someone who knew how to make space feel safe. At first, she didn't look at me, didn't even glance. Then, as if answering a question I hadn't spoken out loud, she said, "Sometimes the answer isn't in the opportunity, but in what you're being protected from." Her voice was warm, steady, the kind of voice that doesn't ask for attention. It commands it without trying. I turned to her, confused. "I'm sorry?" She smiled, just barely, and looked me in the eyes. "Just trust the signs," she said. "They know more than we do." And then, as simply as she came, she stood up. No phone, no bag. She walked across the street without checking the schedule, her steps sure, unhurried. I watched her go. A strange feeling came over me, like I had just spoken to someone I wasn't supposed to meet, but somehow needed to. I stayed there long after she disappeared, trying to hold on to her words. What was I being protected from? The job in Denver felt like a door opening, but now I was starting to wonder if it was a door that led me away from something I was meant to stay close to, or worse, a door into something I was never meant to touch. The wind picked up, gentle but insistent, the kind that carries more than just air. And sitting there beneath that dim light, I felt it again, that quiet presence, that invisible knowing. Trust the signs. I never saw her again. But part of me wonders if she was ever really a stranger at all. That night, sleep didn't come easily. My body was tired, but my mind kept spinning, turning over the woman's words, the number on the jersey, the voice in the silence. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling as the darkness outside deepened into something still and heavy, like the world had fallen asleep with its eyes half open. When I finally drifted off, it wasn't into peace. It was into a dream I still struggle to describe. I was behind the wheel of a car, alone. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, long, icy, and unforgiving. The sky above was gray, washed out, the kind of color that makes you feel like the sun has given up trying. I was driving fast, too fast. The car twisted along narrow turns, the wheels skimming over frost-bitten asphalt. Every bend brought a new kind of panic. I wasn't chasing anything, not exactly, but I also wasn't free. It felt like I was running from something, from everything. And then I hit a curve. The tires lost grip. Time slowed. The world outside the windshield began to spin, and I could feel it in my chest, that awful, weightless moment when you know you're no longer in control. But before the crash, before the pain could reach me, I woke up, gasping. My sheets were soaked with sweat, and I could still hear the echo of screeching tires in my ears. I sat up, gripping the edge of the mattress, trying to find air in a room that suddenly felt too small. And then my phone buzzed. One alert. No message, just the time. 7:17 a.m. I stared at the screen as the numbers burned into me. That was the moment something shifted. Up until then, I told myself it was all in my head. A pattern, sure, but one I was creating, a coincidence, a trick of the mind. But this felt different. The dream hadn't been random. It had pulled me back from something I wasn't supposed to see to the end. And the timing, always that number, always when my heart was most open, most vulnerable. I pressed the phone to my chest and sat there, breathing slowly as a quiet, understanding settled over me. Something was trying to reach me, not to scare me, not to confuse me, but to warn me. The signs weren't noise, they weren't chaos, they were love in disguise, a love that doesn't shout, but whispers, interrupts, waits. I wasn't being haunted, I was being held back, and now, finally, I was listening. I told myself I was imagining it, that the dreams were just stress, the number just coincidence, that I was reading too much into things because I was afraid of change. So I said yes. I accepted the offer. Denver, the new job, the new start. Everyone congratulated me like I'd won something. My manager patted my back. My friends said I was brave. I smiled, nodded, played along. Flights were booked, boxes were packed. The move was in motion, but inside me something was unraveling. Each night the dreams returned, only now they weren't quiet warnings. They were loud, fractured, almost frantic, roads turning to cliffs, elevators falling without buttons, faces, without eyes whispering numbers I didn't want to hear. 7:17. It began to appear everywhere. The receipt from lunch, 7:17. The license plate in front of me at a red light, 7:17. A random voicemail from a wrong number, The call lasted exactly 7 minutes and 17 seconds. Even the groceries betrayed me. A bag of coffee marked 717s. I tried to laugh it off. I even joked with a co-worker once, if I see that number one more time, I'm going to take it personally. But the truth was, I already had. Because this wasn't funny anymore. It felt like something was following me. I stopped sleeping, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. The dreams were louder than any alarm. They didn't just wake me, they shook me. I'd wake gasping, heart racing, drenched in a fear I couldn't name, and the exhaustion wore me down. I stopped eating. My appetite vanished, as if my body no longer trusted the world around it. Even music felt off, like every song was tuned slightly wrong. There was one moment, late at night, when I caught myself sitting on the floor surrounded by half-filled boxes. My suitcase was open. My clothes were folded neatly, my life reduced to zippered compartments and cardboard. But I wasn't moving. I just sat there, hands in my lap, breath shallow, and the clock on the microwave glowing in the dark, 7:17. That's when the fear turned into knowing. It wasn't just anxiety, it wasn't just nerves. It was a deep, bone-level certainty that I was walking towards something I wasn't meant to survive. I didn't know what waited for me in Denver. I only knew I was being pulled away from it by something that saw farther than I could. And the closer I got, the louder the signs became, not to torment me, but to save me. That night, I sat alone in the dim, quiet room and whispered out loud, "Please, if I'm not supposed to go, make it clear." I didn't know who I was speaking to, but I was finally ready to listen. July 17th. The date alone felt heavy when I woke. My mind registered it before my eyes even opened. I had barely slept, only a few fractured hours of restless tossing beneath the weight of dreams I didn't want to remember. The sun was already high, pressing against the blinds. The apartment was silent, filled with the hush that follows something final. My bags were stacked neatly by the door, each one zipped and labeled, like I had sealed away the last pieces of the life I was about to abandon. The taxi arrived on time. I slid into the back seat with my heart in my throat. The driver was cheerful, talking about a recent game, laughing into the rearview mirror like the world hadn't shifted under my feet. I nodded politely, but his voice faded into a background hum. Then my phone buzzed. One notification. Final flight confirmation. Flight 7117 to Denver. I stared at the screen as the world around me dimmed, my reflection staring back from the glass like someone I no longer recognized. It wasn't just a number anymore. It was everything. The dreams, the signs, the stranger's voice, the warnings in the stillness. And now it was the number of the plane I was supposed to board. My chest tightened. A cold rush flooded my arms. My fingers trembled as I turned the screen off. I looked out the window, but the city blurred. The roads, the buildings, they didn't feel familiar anymore. They felt like a story I had wandered too far from. My breath grew shallow, my palms slick with sweat. Something inside me wasn't just whispering now. It was shouting, "Don't go, don't get on that plane." I leaned forward. "Can you pull over, please?" The driver glanced at me in the mirror. "What?" "Pull over." My voice cracked. "I need to get out." He slowed but looked hesitant. "Are you sure? We're almost there." I met his eyes. "Yes, please, I can't get on that plane." He nodded quietly, as if he suddenly understood something wasn't right. The car came to a stop near a small park. I got out, suitcase still in the trunk. I didn't ask for it back. I just stood there on the edge of a sidewalk, watching traffic blur past as the wind tangled through my hair. I didn't feel relief. Not yet. I felt presence, like something unseen had been holding its breath, and finally exhaled. People passed by unaware, but I knew. That flight wasn't mine to take. That path, that moment wasn't meant for me. It was never about fear. It was about being saved from something I was never meant to meet. And in that quiet, strange stillness, under a sky too bright for the weight in my heart, I finally believed. The signs weren't just warnings, they were mercy. I never boarded Flight 717. Instead, I wandered through the airport in a daze, past security, past the gate, until I found a quiet bench near the terminal windows. I sat there, hands folded tightly in my lap, watching planes lift into the sky and vanish into the clouds. It was strange to feel both safe and shaken at the same time. People rushed past me, families with strollers, travelers glued to their phones, flight attendants wheeling small suitcases like it was just another day. But for me, time had stopped. I stayed there for hours. I didn't eat. I didn't speak. I just watched. The overhead voice called out gate changes and boarding groups, but none of it felt real. All I could hear was the echo of that final moment in the taxi, the panic, the clarity, the invisible hand that had pulled me back at the very last breath of choice. That night, back in my apartment, I turned on the news without thinking. It was background noise until I heard the words, "Severe weather system disrupts travel across the Rockies." I looked up. The screen showed footage of dark skies over Denver, wind lashing at airport runways, lightning streaking across swollen clouds. Flights had been rerouted, delayed, then the anchor continued. One flight, on a path nearly identical to the one Flight 717 was scheduled to take, had been forced into an emergency landing after both engines began to fail. During a sudden burst of turbulence, they showed the footage, passengers walking off the plane, pale and shaking, wrapped in blankets under the cold fluorescent lights of a different airport. No major injuries, but it had been close. Too close. I sat perfectly still, the remote slipping from my fingers. My body felt cold all over, like the storm had reached me after all. That could have been my flight. That could have been me. In that moment, there was no joy in being right, only a heavy, trembling gratitude. I thought back to the voice in the night. Not this path. The boy in the jersey, the stranger at the bus stop, the dream that made me wake before the crash ever came. Every sign, every moment had been a thread pulling me away from something I was never meant to face, and no one would ever know. There would be no headlines, no miracle story, just me alone in my quiet apartment, held by a mystery I could never prove but would never doubt again. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was a rescue, a quiet, holy rescue, disguised as a feeling, wrapped in numbers, delivered by whispers. And I had listened. I never moved to Denver. I stayed in Phoenix, quietly, softly, without announcement or explanation. The boxes were unpacked one by one, like breathing slowly after a panic. The suitcase stayed in the closet, untouched. My life continued, but not in the way it might have. And as the days passed, something changed. The number, 717, stopped showing up. Not all at once, but gradually, like it had finished saying what it came to say, like a messenger stepping back into the shadows once the message had been received. But just because that sign faded doesn't mean the others stopped. Now they appear in different ways. A moment of peace during a golden sunset, when the air feels like it's wrapping around me instead of rushing past. A stranger offering kindness when I need it most. A deep breath that fills my chest with clarity instead of confusion. I've started calling these things small confirmations, little nods from the universe, gentle yeses from something bigger than me. Do I know what would have happened if I had boarded that plane? No. Do I know what might have waited for me in that new city, that new job, that new life? Not exactly, but deep in my soul, I know something was trying to stop me, trying to reach me, to protect me, to guide me back before it was too late. And I listened, not because I was brave, but because I was desperate enough to be still, open enough to feel. Now, when people ask if I believe in angels, I smile, not because I have answers, but because I remember. They don't always have wings. Sometimes they speak in numbers. Sometimes they whisper through dreams, or wrap themselves in the quiet voice of a stranger at a bus stop. Sometimes they appear just long enough to nudge us away from the edge, so softly we don't even realize we were falling. I don't tell this story to convince anyone. I tell it because I carry it. Because somewhere in the silence between logic and mystery, between coincidence and faith, is the place where I was saved. And maybe, just maybe, you've been there too. Have you ever experienced a sign like this? Do you believe it was just coincidence or something divine? What would you have done if it happened to you? Do you think angels are trying to guide us, even when we don't notice? Whatever you believe, I hope this story reminded you that life speaks. Not always in ways we expect, but always in time. If this story touched your heart, don't let these signs go unnoticed. Subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us to hear more real stories of faith, mystery, and the moments when life whispers, just in time. Thank you for staying until the end. But remember, there are stories that aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to be felt. We'll see you in the next one, if you're still listening.